The concrete outside the Ashcroft gates was wet and cold, and Maris had been sitting on it long enough that she'd stopped feeling her ankles. One garbage bag, the cheap, thin kind that tears if you look at it wrong. It held 2 sweaters, her CPA exam books from before she met Eli, a pair of running shoes with a worn-down heel, and the framed photograph of the 2 of them standing on a dock in Maine the summer before the diagnosis. Leonard's security team hadn't packed her suitcases. They'd swept her belongings off shelves with their forearms, the way you clear a table of dishes, and knotted the bag at the top like a question mark. She had $34 in her bank account. She'd checked on the cab ride over, back when she still had a reason to check, and a raw, burning line across the back of her neck where the locket chain had been. The locket was gone. That was the part Maris kept coming back to. Not the estate, not the will Leonard Ashcroft had presented with the practiced calm of a man who had planned this the moment Eli's heart monitor flatlined. Not even the humiliation of being marched to the front door of the house she'd lived in for 4 years by 2 men in tactical vests, while Constance Ashcroft watched from the staircase landing and picked invisible lint off her sleeve. The locket. Thin silver, small enough to disappear in a closed fist. Her father's photo inside, taken the summer before he died, where he was laughing at something off-camera and squinting against the light. Eli had found it in a box of her things when they moved into the Ashcroft house and had it cleaned and set on a new chain. "So he can come along," Eli had said, and that was the moment Maris understood she had married someone worth keeping. Constance had nodded to the security team. Ashcroft property stays with the family. A lie brazen and unhesitating, the locket had belonged to Maris's dead father, not to any Ashcroft, but in that house with those 2 men and Mr. Bale, the family attorney, hovering near the door with his briefcase already open. The truth had nowhere to stand. They'd torn it from her neck. She hadn't cried. She wasn't going to. What she was going to do was sit on this wet concrete and think very carefully about a contact saved in her phone under a single letter. S. 4 years ago, Maris had been working late in the DA's financial crimes unit, passing shell companies in a case that would eventually go nowhere, when she'd come home to find a man bleeding in the stairwell of her building. Not bleeding a little, bleeding in the way that turns a rational person into someone who acts on instinct instead of policy. He was conscious. Barely. Even slumped against a cinder-block wall with his coat soaked through, he radiated something she could only describe later as authority, the kind that doesn't announce itself. She hadn't called 911. She didn't know precisely why, except that there were 2 men in the lobby below who looked like the building's security cameras were about to experience a technical malfunction, and something told her the choice was stitch him up or leave him to die on her landing. She chose to stitch him. Her mother had been a home nurse. Some habits survive childhood without asking permission. He hadn't thanked her. He'd watched her work with the flat, assessing attention of someone calculating the risk she represented, and when he was coherent enough to speak, he said, "You didn't call anyone." "I hate paperwork," Maris had replied, which was true enough. He'd taken something from his coat pocket and held out a card. Black, no name, just a number embossed. "I pay what I owe," he said. "I don't take payment for basic human decency." "It's not payment, it's a ledger entry." His voice was gravel over cold iron, the kind that meant he'd never had to raise it. "One favor, you call it once, then we're square." She'd taken the card. She'd looked him up afterward, because she was a forensic accountant, and that was what forensic accountants did. Followed the numbers until they found a name. The name was Stroud. She'd burned the card. She'd kept the number. She hadn't used it in 4 years. She'd met Eli 3 months later. She'd left the DA's office when the case collapsed, gone into private accounting, fallen for the quiet man with the bad heart and the family who looked at her like she was something they'd found on the bottom of an expensive shoe. She'd told herself the number was theoretical, a parachute she'd never pull. The rain picked up. Her coat was already soaked through. Down the street, the Ashcroft estate's exterior lamp clicked on, and in its yellow spill, She could see two figures approaching the iron pedestrian gate from the inside. She recognized the build of the man in front, the same security contractor who'd taken the locket from her neck. She opened her phone. The screen had a hairline fracture across the upper corner, courtesy of the front steps. She opened a new message. She typed, "The stairwell. 4 years ago. I'm calling it in." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The gate lock clicked. The pedestrian gate swung open, hinges loud against the rain. A flashlight beam crossed the wet asphalt and found her. "She's still here." The voice was bored. "Mr. Ashcroft says if she's still in the neighborhood after 11, we encourage her to find another one." Maris stood up. Her knees were unreliable, and the garbage bag was heavy, and she made neither of those facts anyone's problem. "I'm on a public street, adjacent to private property." The second man stepped through the gate, keys in hand. "And you're making Mr. Ashcroft uncomfortable." She couldn't outrun them. She couldn't fight two men twice her size. She was calculating, in the flat practical way she'd always calculated, how much noise she could make before they got her into a car when she heard it. Not an engine, a presence. The low, particular growl of heavy vehicles moving without urgency. The way things move when they don't need to hurry because speed has never been the point. 3 black SUVs rounded the corner. They didn't slow for the speed bumps. They came to rest in formation along the McB, not parked, resting, engines idling in a synchronized low note that felt less like sound and more like pressure. The headlights were white, cold, and absolute. The back door of the middle vehicle opened. The man who stepped out was tall and unhurried, wearing a dark coat the rain was doing nothing to intimidate. He opened an umbrella. Not quickly, not the way you open an umbrella in the rain, but with the deliberate precision of someone who has decided what the weather will and will not be permitted to do, and looked down the street. He took in the security contractors, the gate, Maris on the curb next to a garbage bag. The contractors had gone very still. Stroud crossed to her without looking at them. He crouched down in front of her, tilting the umbrella to cover her, and the sudden absence of rain against her face was disorienting. He looked at her the way she remembered from the stairwell. Not with concern, with calculation, running numbers. His eyes stopped at her throat, at the raw red line where the chain had been. "Who took it?" he said. "Ashcroft Security, Leonard's order." Her voice was steadier than she deserved. "They said it was family property. It wasn't. It belonged to my father." Stroud straightened. He spoke without looking at the contractors. "Penn." The front doors of the SUVs opened. The contractors looked at what was stepping out and made the decision men make when they understand, suddenly and completely, that they've been operating at the wrong scale. They turned for the gate. Stroud's men didn't run. They walked, and walking was enough. Maris looked away. When she looked back, the contractors were no longer standing, and Stroud was offering her his hand. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and absolute. His penthouse occupied the top floor of a building listed in city permit databases under a name she recognized, later as a 3-layer shell company. The city spread below it like a circuit board in the dark. Maris sat on a charcoal sofa while a woman she hadn't met yet projected a dossier onto the wall screen from a laptop balanced on her knees. "Zara handles the architecture," Stroud said. "Asset architecture," Zara supplied without looking up, which is the polite way to say I find things people have hidden and make them unhideable. She paused. "You look like you've survived something." "In-laws," Maris said. Zara nodded as though this explained everything, which it did. Penn, the man with the rumpled sleeves and the expression of someone who had seen everything twice, slid a mug of coffee across the table toward her. Maris wrapped both hands around it and began, in the flat, methodical tone of someone who had spent years presenting financial evidence to skeptical attorneys, to lay out the Ashcroft Group's structure, Leonard's infrastructure contract, the bridge financing, the 72-hour window. Stroud listened without interrupting, which was more than most people managed. "There's something else," she said, when she'd finished the business of it. "Ely told me something. a week before he died. He had a lucid afternoon. The medication they had him on was suppressing him more than his condition warranted, and some days it thinned enough for him to be himself again. She looked at the bandage Penn had applied to the abrasion at her throat. He said he'd found something 8 months earlier in his father's books, transfers that didn't correspond to any contracted work, quarterly, consistent amounts, moving through a materials supplier in Juarez. Penn looked up. Money laundering through inflated contractor invoices, Maris continued. The infrastructure contract was the capstone, large enough, legitimate enough, to clean a decade of cash in a single move. Eli confronted Leonard. 2 weeks later, his cardiologist was replaced by Dr. Mast, who came with Leonard's personal recommendation and a willingness to adjust medication protocols in whatever direction his employer preferred. She stopped. Eli lived 6 more months after that. He didn't have to. The room was very quiet. He hid the evidence before he lost the ability to, a safety deposit box off-site under his mother's maiden name. He told me the box number. He said the key was in the locket. She looked at Stroud directly. Hidden inside the clasp mechanism, he'd had a jeweler fit it. He trusted that I'd never take the locket off. The pause was brief and private. He was right about that. Stroud stood up. Leonard Ashcroft had breakfast every Wednesday at the Meridian Club, which had no sign on the exterior and required a letter of introduction to join. Stroud arrived without either. The security at the private dining room door had a quiet conversation with 2 of Stroud's men and then found somewhere else to be. Leonard was mid-sentence when Stroud pulled out the chair across from him and sat down uninvited. The attorney at Leonard's left pressed himself into his chair. The 3 board members present went still. Leonard recovered his composure with the ease of a man who had been managing his expressions for 60 years. "This is a private room." "It was," Stroud agreed. "I'm here for the locket." "I don't know what you're." "Small. Silver. Your contractor removed it from a woman's neck at 10:45 last night on your instruction." Stroud's voice didn't rise above a conversational register. It didn't need to. It contained a photograph, its sentimental property belonging to the woman who was your daughter-in-law for 4 years. I'd like it returned. Anything removed from that property belongs to the Ashcroft estate. Stroud reached into his jacket. He set his phone on the table and tapped it once. The presentation screen at the front of the dining room, meant for board slide decks, lit up with a spreadsheet, column headers, dates, transfer amounts, the name of a materials company in Juarez. Leonard Ashcroft's fork stopped moving. "I have a colleague," Stroud said, "who specializes in finding things people have gone to considerable effort to bury. She was up early this morning." He rested his hands on the white linen. "The locket, Leonard." A board member reached slowly for his phone. One of Stroud's men, positioned near the door, shook his head once. The board member put his phone down. Leonard's hand went to his breast pocket. He set the locket on the table. His fingers were not entirely steady. Stroud picked it up, slipped it into his pocket, and stood. "Zara," he said quietly. "The bridge financing on the infrastructure contract has been recalled," he told Leonard, adjusting his cuff. "I purchased the debt this morning and I'm calling it in, effective immediately. You're short $68 million. The contract is void." He glanced at the board members. "I'd recommend getting ahead of the news cycle, gentlemen." He left without hurrying because he had never needed to. The key was fitted into the locket's clasp with the precision of a man who had trusted his instincts about the kind of world he lived in. It took Penn 4 minutes to extract it without damaging the photo inside. Her father was laughing, squinting against the sun. The same expression she remembered, and the same expression she'd been afraid she was beginning to forget. Maris held the locket for a moment. Then she put it on. Box 441, a branch location in the financial district. The clerk didn't ask questions. The drawer was heavy for its size. Inside, a sealed envelope, a memory card in a small plastic case, and a sheet of plain paper folded once. The handwriting was Eli's early handwriting, not the uncertain script of the final weeks, but the careful print of the man who had argued with her about the ethics of double-entry bookkeeping over appetizers at a fundraiser and asked for her number on a cocktail napkin. Maris. If you're reading this, the math finally came out wrong for me. I want you to know I understood, toward the end, exactly what my father was doing. I want you to know I didn't agree to any of it, and I never stopped trying to stop it. I just ran out of time. The memory card has everything. The transfers, the correspondence, the name of every judge Leonard has purchased, and what he paid for each one. The name on the back of this page is a federal prosecutor. She's been building a case on the Juarez network for 3 years. She's been missing the domestic laundering piece. Give it to her. The envelope has the real will. Witnessed by a federal notary who is not on my father's payroll. The house, the board seat, everything. I know you didn't marry me for it. I know you'll use it the right way. I loved you from the moment you told me that double-entry bookkeeping was the closest thing to moral philosophy that corporate America had ever produced. I have loved you every day since. I'm sorry I didn't get more of them. Eli. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She stood in the aisle for a moment, with the envelope and the memory card in her hands. Then she walked to where Stroud was waiting. Leonard Ashcroft had his own son's medication adjusted until his heart gave out, she said. To protect the laundering operation. The evidence is here. She met his eyes. Her voice was flat and clear, the tone she used when presenting figures that didn't require emphasis because the numbers spoke for themselves. I want to call the federal prosecutor, and I want to be standing in that foyer when they arrive. The Ashcroft estate's front doors came in on the second strike of the battering ram. Maris stood at the top of the staircase as the tactical team moved through the marble foyer below. She had borrowed a blazer from Penn and pulled her hair back, and the locket was warm at the base of her throat, and she was standing at the top of the same staircase from which Constance had watched Leonard's men carry her life out in a garbage bag 40 hours earlier. Constance emerged from the morning room and was turned and pressed to the flocked wallpaper before she finished her first sentence. Leonard came from the study at a run and made it 3 steps before 2 agents put him on the floor. His cheek hit the marble exactly where Maris's face had been. She walked down the stairs. Leonard wrenched his head up. All the architecture of his face was gone. He was just a man now, which was worse for him than the handcuffs. You have nothing. You manufactured this. She's been after the estate since the beginning, I spent 4 years as a forensic accountant in the DA's financial crimes unit, Maris said, stopping 2 steps from the bottom. I know what a clean set of books looks like, and I know what one looks like when someone has been running a shadow ledger alongside it for a decade. Eli kept records of every transaction. He was your son. He trusted the math even when he couldn't trust you. She looked down at him on the floor of his own foyer. The books are balanced, Leonard. They put him in the back of a federal vehicle. The doors closed. The convoy moved down the gravel drive and out through the iron gates, and the sound of it faded, and the estate went quiet in a way that felt permanent. Maris walked out to the portico. The morning was clear after the rain. The grounds spread out around her, the fountain, the conservatory wing, the manicured half-mile of it. All of it hers by law as of 1 hour ago, which was the strangest sentence she had ever been in a position to think. Stroud appeared beside her. It's a lot of house, he said. It's a monument to the wrong things. She looked at the fountain. Imported stone, self-congratulatory scale. I'm selling it, all of it. The proceeds go to the city's public housing rehabilitation fund. She paused. I grew up in a building that flooded every spring. There are a lot of buildings like that. The corner of Stroud's mouth moved. That'll annoy Leonard considerably in his cell, he said. Good. The morning light lay across the gravel drive in long flat lines. Maris had a will in her pocket, an estate in her name, and the particular exhaustion of someone who has survived something that shouldn't have been survivable. She also had, she was realizing, a great deal of work ahead of her. The Ashcroft Group's remaining contracts, she said, The legitimate ones, the actual construction business, the suppliers, the subcontractors. Someone will move on them the moment this hits the news, and not someone better. She turned to face him. I know the books. I know exactly where the rot was, and what's clean underneath it. But I don't know the players, and I don't have the muscle to keep people out while I restructure. She held his gaze. I need a partner, Stroud. The silence between them had weight. The world I operate in, he said quietly, stains things, people, permanently. Maris looked at the raw skin at her throat, the bruise along her jaw, the place where the locket had been missing for a night. I was already marked, she said. I just didn't know the full extent of it until 48 hours ago. Stroud was still for a long moment. Then he opened his palm, not a handshake, an offer, and she put her hand in it. His grip was warm and unbreakable. Neither of them said anything else. There wasn't anything else necessary. 3 months later, the Ashcroft Group no longer existed under that name. What existed instead was a holding company with a new chairwoman, a restructured board that had learned very quickly what the new regime expected of it, and a silent partner who appeared at precisely the meetings where silence was no longer an adequate strategy. At one such meeting, a senior vice president named Harkin was explaining why the worker safety budget was the obvious candidate for cuts, as it had always been the obvious candidate under Leonard. When the boardroom doors opened and Stroud walked in and took up a position behind the chairwoman's chair, and Harkin simply stopped speaking mid-sentence. The safety budget stays, Maris said, without looking up from the agenda in front of her. We're renegotiating the materials contracts instead. I've identified 3 suppliers charging 20% above market rate. We'll be switching by end of quarter. She set her pen down. Anyone else? No one else. When the room had emptied, Stroud sat on the edge of the table in the way he'd taken to doing, when there was no one left to perform authority for, and looked at her. The estate sale finalized this morning, she said. I know, Zara tracked it. The money transferred to the housing fund at noon. She turned her pen in her fingers. Ely would have liked that part. Stroud reached across the table and set his hand over hers, stilling the movement. It was a habit he'd developed somewhere in the past 3 months, and she'd never asked him to stop, which meant something that neither of them had made a point of naming yet. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city burned with its own light against the early dark. Towers, reflecting towers. The river cutting through it all like something that didn't care about the money or the power, or the names on the buildings. What are you going to build next? Stroud asked. His voice in the empty boardroom was different from the voice he used in rooms full of people who feared it. Still low, still precise, but different. Maris looked at the city. She thought about the building that had flooded every spring. About Eli's handwriting, careful and deliberate, trusting that she would find the box, that she would open the letter, that she would know what to do with numbers that told the truth. Something that doesn't rot from the inside, she said. His hand tightened around hers. The city glittered on below them, indifferent and enormous and alive, and somewhere in it a new set of books was being written, clean ones, this time, in a hand that knew exactly what it was counting and why it mattered.